following story was told to me by my grandfather when I was around 13 years old. Back then, my middle school history teacher gave us this assignment, where we had to interview an older family member and write down an important story from their life. Most kids came back with stories about war, farming, or how cheap everything used to be. I expected something like that instead. My grandfather told me a story that genuinely disturbed me for years afterward. Even now, whenever I pass one of those old roadside motels sitting alone beside empty highways, I think about what happened out there in Arizona. My grandfather was 76 when he told me this story. Before he died, he told me I could share it someday as long as I changed the names and locations, so I did. The following story is written from his perspective. My name's Walter. I grew up in northern Arizona, near a little desert town called Red Hollow. Back in the 1950s, maybe 1,500 people lived there if you counted everybody outside town limits too. It was one of those places where people still left pies on windowsills and unlocked their front doors at night. Everybody knew everybody. If your truck broke down, somebody stopped to help. If somebody died, half the town brought casseroles over to the family house. People trusted each other back then. Maybe too much. Right outside town, sitting beside old Route 66, there was a place called the Silver Moon Motel. It wasn't fancy, just a long row of single-story rooms with faded turquoise paint and a buzzing neon sign that worked only about half the time. But travelers liked it because it was quiet and cheap, and because the owner, Lorraine Mercer, treated people kindly. At least that's what everyone believed. Lorraine was one of the most respected women in town. Church every Sunday, charity bake sales during Christmas, free rooms for stranded travelers during bad storms. People loved her. Honestly, I did too at first. She had this calm voice that made you feel safe the second she started talking. Always smiling, always polite. Even during the brutal Arizona summers, she dressed neatly like she was heading to church. Her husband had disappeared years earlier. That was the official story. Anyway, supposedly he left after an argument one night and never came back. Some folks thought he ran off to California. Others figured he died somewhere in the desert after wrecking his truck. Either way, Lorraine stayed alone afterward with her son Daniel. Now Daniel was strange, not dangerous, just quiet, Lorraine claimed. He'd gotten horribly sick as a child, and that the fever damaged his mind permanently. He barely spoke above a whisper, walked with a limp, never made eye contact with people. By the time I knew him, he was maybe 17 or 18 years old, but Lorraine still treated him like a helpless little boy. Nobody questioned it. Back then, if a widow told you her son was disabled, you believed her. And because people felt sorry for them, the whole town practically adopted the Mercers as family. Mechanics fixed motel plumbing for free. Church groups brought groceries. Travelers tipped extra after hearing Daniel's story. Looking back now, I think that's what still bothers me most. Everybody thought they knew Lorraine Mercer, but nobody actually did. I started working at the Silver Moon during the summer of 1958. I was 17. And trying to save money for a pickup truck, Lorraine hired me to clean rooms, carry luggage, and repair small things around the property. Most days were normal families. Passing through Arizona, truckers stopping for the night, young couples, heading west toward California. But every evening, right around sunset, Lorraine would lock herself inside room 8. Now room 8 sat at the far end of the motel, slightly separated from the others. Nobody ever rented it, not once. At first, I assumed it was being renovated or maybe had plumbing issues. But every single night, Lorraine carried food trays, towels, medicine bottles, and blankets inside before locking the door behind her. Then she'd stay in there for hours. Whenever guests asked about the room, she'd smile politely and say it was under maintenance. The only problem was, people claimed that room had supposedly been under maintenance for over 10 years. One evening, I asked Daniel about it while we were emptying ashtrays outside the office. The second I mentioned room 8, he froze, not nervous, terrified. He kept staring toward the room like somebody inside might hear us then. In this tiny, shaking voice, he whispered something that made my stomach drop. He said, "She keeps him there." I asked him who. Daniel immediately started shaking his head. And right then, Lorraine suddenly stepped outside the office. I swear to God. Both of us jumped. She smiled at me, but not at Daniel. Never Daniel, she calmly told him to go inside, and that boy practically ran after that. Things started feeling wrong around the motel late at night. I'd hear furniture scraping inside room 8. Sometimes the curtains moved even when Lorraine wasn't there, and twice. I heard someone crying inside. Soft crying. Weak crying. At first, I convinced myself it had to be Daniel. Maybe Lorraine locked him in there during episodes or something. But then came the state trooper. One night around midnight, an Arizona Highway Patrol officer stopped because his radiator overheated outside town. Lorraine rented him a room while his engine cooled down. The next morning, I found him smoking beside room 8. He asked me something. Strange, he asked if Lorraine had another son. I told him. No. The trooper frowned and said sometime during the night he heard a man inside room 8, begging for help. Not screaming, begging. He said the voice sounded weak and sick. According to him, he knocked on the door. But Lorraine answered immediately and claimed he must have heard the television, only there was one problem. Room 8 didn't have a television. I knew because I'd helped remove it months earlier. The trooper must have noticed something change in my face, because he stared at me for a second before asking if everything was all right. And before I could answer, Lorraine appeared behind us for maybe half a second. Her smile disappeared completely. What replaced it scared me more than any ghost story ever could. Pure hatred, cold hatred. Then it vanished just as quickly. She laughed politely, blamed the old pipes, and offered the trooper free coffee before he got back on the road. And somehow, that was enough for him. He left. That's the thing about people like Lorraine. They know exactly how normal people think, exactly what to say. A week later, Daniel disappeared. Lorraine claimed he'd gone to Phoenix for treatment at some special medical facility. Everybody believed her. But the night before, Daniel vanished. I heard screaming coming from room 8. Muffled, screaming like someone trying desperately not to be heard. And 3 days later, somebody finally opened that room. And what they found inside? Destroyed Red Hollow forever. The person who finally opened room 8 wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't me. Either it was a traveling salesman named Frank Dalton. Frank had checked into the Silver Moon late one evening, during a dust storm after his Buick started overheating outside Flagstaff. He was one of those loud, friendly types who talked too much, smoked constantly, and always acted like everybody around him was already his best friend. Lorraine hated him immediately, you could tell. Frank kept joking around with her while signing the guest book, but she barely smiled back. Meanwhile, Daniel was nowhere to be seen. That alone felt strange. Normally, Daniel handled luggage or swept the parking lot during check-ins, but after Lorraine claimed he'd left for Phoenix, the motel suddenly felt emptier, quieter, wrong somehow. Frank stayed in room 7, right beside room 8, and around maybe 2 in the morning, he started pounding on my door. I lived in a little employee shack behind the motel back then, mostly because my father worked nights at the rail yard and I wanted independence. I remember waking up confused as hell to Frank yelling my name outside. When I opened the door, he looked pale, not drunk pale, scared pale. He asked me if Lorraine had someone staying in room 8. I immediately lied and said no. Frank kept glancing over his shoulder toward the motel. Row? Then he told me he'd heard somebody whispering through the wall for over an hour. Not random noises, words. He said the voice sounded like an older man begging for water. I told him maybe the pipes carried sound strangely between rooms even while saying it. I knew it sounded stupid. Frank stared at me for a few seconds before quietly saying, "Kid, somebody's locked in there." And right then, Every hair on my arm stood up because deep down, I think I already knew he was right. Frank wanted to call the sheriff immediately. I should have agreed instead. I told him to wait until morning. That decision haunted me for the rest of my life. The next morning, Lorraine acted perfectly normal. Perfectly. Calm, she brought coffee to guests, asked travelers about road conditions, watered flowers outside the office. But there was one thing she couldn't hide. Exhaustion. She looked terrible. Her makeup barely covered the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook while pouring coffee. Frank noticed it too. I could tell, around noon. Lorraine left town briefly to pick up supplies, the second her car disappeared down Route 66. Frank walked straight to room 8. I followed him. I wish I could tell you I followed because I was brave. Truth is, I followed because I was terrified of what he might find alone. The door was locked. Frank knocked first. Nothing. Then he knocked harder. Still nothing. But just as we turned away, we heard movement inside, slow movement, like somebody dragging themselves across the floor. Frank looked at me. I looked back at him, and then we heard it. A weak voice saying, "Please." Just that one word. Please. Frank immediately started trying to force the door open. I remember standing there frozen while he slammed his shoulder against it over and over until finally the cheap motel lock gave out. The smell hit us first. Jesus Christ, I still remember that smell. Rotting food, human waste, mold, sickness. The curtains were nailed shut from the inside, so the room stayed mostly dark, except for thin little cracks of sunlight leaking around the edges. And sitting against the far wall was a man, at least. I think he'd once been a man. He looked almost skeletal. Long gray beard, sunken eyes, wrists so thin they looked ready to snap. One ankle was chained to an iron pipe. Running along the wall, at first neither of us moved. We just stared. The old man looked terrified of us, actually terrified, like he thought we were there to hurt him. Then Frank whispered, "Oh my God." The room itself looked like some kind of prison cell. Buckets, dirty blankets, stacks of canned food, medicine bottles. Everywhere, and scratched into the wall beside the bed, were tally marks. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The old man tried speaking again, but his voice barely worked. Finally, Frank crouched beside him and asked who he was. And I swear on my life, what he said next nearly made me throw up. He said, "I'm Loren's husband." Frank just stared at him. So did I. Because according to everybody in Red Hollow, Loren's husband disappeared almost 20 years earlier. But the old man kept talking slowly. Painfully, he explained that he never left. Lorraine locked him in room 8 herself. According to him, it started after his trucking accident back in the early 40s. He survived the crash with a head injury and spent months recovering. Somewhere during that time, Lorraine became obsessed with the idea that the world was dangerous and cruel, and that only she truly knew how to protect her family. At first, it was small things, not allowing him visitors, controlling money, telling neighbors he was still recovering. But then she started drugging him, sleeping pills mostly. Eventually, she convinced the town he'd abandoned her completely. And once everybody believed it, she'd never let him leave again. The old man started crying while explaining it. Not loud crying. The kind that comes from somebody who's been broken for years. Frank immediately ran to call the sheriff. I stayed behind. I don't know why. Maybe because I couldn't stop staring at those tally marks on the wall. The old man noticed me looking at, then quietly said something I'll never forget. He told me the marks weren't counting days. They were counting people. And right then, somebody pulled into the motel parking lot outside. Lorraine was home. The moment we heard Lorraine's car tires crunch across the gravel outside, the old man's entire body changed. I mean, instantly. His eyes widened so much I could see the whites all around them, and he started shaking against the wall, chained hard enough to rattle the pipe behind him. Then he whispered, "You need to leave. Not hide. Not help me. Leave." That should have told me everything outside. I heard the motel office door slam shut, then footsteps, slow, measured, not running, not panicked, just steady footsteps, moving room to room beneath the afternoon heat. I remember standing there completely frozen while the old man kept begging me to go. But before I could move, Lorraine's voice drifted through the broken doorway, soft as ever. Danny? She always called me Danny back then, even though my real name was Daniel. Danny, sweetheart, are you here? The old man started hyperventilating. I could actually hear his teeth chattering, and that terrified me more than anything else. Because if a grown man who'd survived 20 years chained inside that room was scared of her, what the hell had she done to him? I finally stumbled backward toward the doorway just as Lorraine appeared outside room 8. For maybe 2 or 3 seconds, nobody spoke. She looked at the busted lock, then at me, then inside the room, and all the warmth disappeared from her face. I'd never seen hatred like that before. Not yelling, not rage, something colder, like looking at a snake deciding whether or not to strike. Then she smiled, actually smiled, and said, "You shouldn't have gone in there." I tried explaining that Frank had called the sheriff already. Big mistake. The second I said sheriff, Lorraine lunged at me. People always imagine old women moving slowly. Lorraine didn't. She hit me hard enough to slam me against the motel railing and grabbed my shirt with both hands while screaming straight into my face. "You stupid little bastard." It was the first time I'd ever heard her raise her voice, and it didn't sound human. Not really. Meanwhile, inside room 8, her husband started screaming too. Not words, just pure panic. Then suddenly, Lorraine stopped. Completely stopped. Because down the road we heard sirens. Her expression changed immediately. She let go of my shirt and calmly fixed her hair like nothing had happened. I remember backing away from her thinking, this woman is insane. Not angry, not emotional, insane. Sheriff. Walker arrived first with another deputy behind him. Frank was standing near the office waving them down like a madman. The second Walker saw inside room 8. His face turned gray now. You gotta understand something. Back then, Red Hollow barely had crime. A drunk fistfight outside. The gas station was considered big news. Nobody there was prepared for something like this. Walker immediately ordered Lorraine into handcuffs, and that's when she started laughing. Not nervous laughing either. Real laughing. Deep. Laughing like the whole thing amused her. She kept saying they didn't understand, that she'd protected him. Protected all of them. The sheriff searched the room while EMTs worked on the old man, and that's when they found the EMSA. Notebooks, 3 of them, hidden beneath the mattress. Every page filled in. Lorraine's handwriting, daily schedules, medication doses, punishments, behavior reports. Like she was documenting an animal instead of a husband. But the worst part wasn't the notebooks. It was what they found written over and over again in the margins. They always try to leave, again and again. Hundreds of times they always try to leave. At first, everyone assumed Lorraine suffered some kind of psychotic breakdown after the accident years earlier. That explanation lasted maybe 2 days, until investigators started digging, because it turned out Lorraine's husband wasn't. The first person who disappeared around the Silver Moon motel? Not even close. There'd been drifters, travelers, a waitress from Amarillo back in 1948, truck mechanic who supposedly skipped town owing gambling debts, a teenage runaway. All connected to Route 66, all last seen near Red Hollow. And suddenly those tally marks on the wall started meaning something much worse. The FBI got involved after that. They tore the motel apart, and underneath the office floorboards, they found bones. A lot of bones. I won't go into detail about what they uncovered because, honestly, some of it still makes me sick thinking about it. But I will tell you this. Lorraine's husband survived long enough to testify against her, barely. According to reports, she'd convinced herself the world outside was poisoned, corrupt, evil. She believed people who came through the motel carried sin with them. She thought she was saving certain people by keeping them there. Others, she claimed, were beyond saving. That's all I'm saying about that. Lorraine never showed remorse, not once, even during the trial, especially during the trial. People who attended said she mostly sat there smiling faintly while everyone around her cried. And every now and then, she'd look toward her husband and whisper things under her breath that made him visibly panic. Eventually, she was sentenced to life in prison at the state hospital instead of a normal prison because doctors declared her criminally insane. But here's the part that still bothers me, the part I've never really gotten over. About 6 months after Lorraine was locked away, they demolished the Silver Moon Motel, completely bulldozed the whole property. I went out there afterward with some friends from school because teenagers are morbid like that. Most of the buildings were gone already, just rubble left, broken concrete, splintered wood, dust everywhere. And while we were walking around the remains of Room 8, we found fresh tally marks scratched into one surviving section of wall. Not old ones, fresh ones. And underneath them, written so lightly, we almost missed it, were 4 words scratched into the plaster. She let me out. I never went back there again. And honestly, I don't drive Route 66 at night anymore either. And whenever I pass one of those old roadside campgrounds out in the woods now, my Uncle Rick isn't the kind of guy who scares easily. He did 12 years as a park ranger in Northern California, spent most of that time alone in forests bigger than some towns, and once had to shoot a mountain lion that charged a family near Shasta Lake. So when a man like that tells you there's one place he'll never go near again, you listen. This happened sometime in the late 90s, back when my uncle worked at a campground called Pine Hollow, about an hour north of Redding. Pine Hollow wasn't one of those polished family campgrounds with gift shops and paved roads. It was old, real old. Half the cabins were built back in the 40s, and most of them looked like they'd survived a war. The place sat deep in the woods beside a narrow lake, surrounded by pine trees so tall they blocked out the evening sun before dinner time. Cell phones barely worked there. Radio reception came and went. And after dark, the entire campground felt cut off from the rest of the world. Rick actually loved that part. He said city people don't realize how loud civilization is until they spend a week somewhere truly quiet. But Pine Hollow wasn't exactly thriving anymore. Most summers, only a handful of cabins got rented, usually to fishermen, old couples, or families trying to save money. And way down at the very edge of the property sat Cabin 14. Nobody rented Cabin 14. Not anymore, according to Rick. The cabin had been closed for years after some kind of accident. That was the official explanation anyway. But whenever he asked older employees what happened there, they'd either change the subject or tell him not to worry about it. One maintenance guy named Leon got drunk one night and finally told him the truth, or at least part of it, back in the early 80s. A family rented Cabin 14 for a week-long vacation. Mom, dad, little boy around 8 years old, and halfway through their stay, the parents vanished. Just gone, their car stayed parked. Outside, their wallets were still inside. Food sat untouched on the table. But the parents disappeared without a trace, the only person left. Behind was their son. According to Leon, rangers found the kid sitting alone on the cabin porch 3 days later, starving, covered in dirt, barefoot. When police asked where his parents went, the boy supposedly said, "They went into the trees." That was it. No crying, no panic, just they went into the trees. Search teams combed the forest for nearly 2 weeks. Nothing. No bodies. No clothes. No clothes. No blood, nothing. And eventually the whole thing faded into one of those weird local stories people stop talking about because nobody likes thinking about them. But here's where things get strange. The boy disappeared too. Not immediately. The state placed him with relatives somewhere down south, according to Leon. But about 6 months later, he vanished from there as well. And after that, every now and then, people camping near Cabin 14 started reporting weird things. Mostly at night, a child walking between the trees, knocking sounds on cabin walls. A little boy asking for help outside after midnight. The campground owners blamed raccoons, drunks, or teenagers screwing around. Still, nobody wanted Cabin 14 anymore. Eventually, management just locked it up permanently now. Rick didn't believe ghost stories at all. He figured the campground owners simply used the rumors to explain why the cabin sat rotting instead of paying to renovate it. And honestly, nothing happened. Until October of 1998, that's when Pine Hollow stayed open a little longer than usual because a hunting season brought in extra business. Most guests stayed near the main office area. But one Friday evening, a man arrived asking specifically for a cabin far away from everybody else. Rick described him as thin, pale, maybe late 40s. Not creepy exactly, just nervous. The kind of nervous where somebody keeps looking over their shoulder without realizing it. The guy introduced himself as Walter Briggs. Paid. Cash. No luggage besides one duffel bag. And asked one weird question before taking his key. Has anyone stayed in cabin 14 recently? Rick told him no. Walter immediately asked for it. Now, management usually kept cabin 14 locked. But technically, it still functioned. Power worked. Water mostly worked, and since Walter insisted, Rick finally handed over the key. Big mistake that first night. Nothing happened, but around 2:30 in the morning, Rick got woken by banging on the office door. Walter stood outside absolutely drenched in sweat despite the freezing weather. And the first thing out of his mouth was, "There's someone outside my cabin." Rick assumed drunk camper, maybe hunters messing around, so he grabbed a flashlight and drove Walter back toward cabin 14 in the campground truck. The whole ride there, Walter kept rambling, saying someone had been circling the cabin for over an hour, walking slowly around it, scratching the walls, tapping the windows. Rick asked if he actually saw anybody. Walter went quiet for a second before answering. Not clearly. That answer bothered him immediately, because either you saw someone or you didn't. But once they reached cabin 14, everything looked normal. No footprints, no broken windows, no signs anybody had been there. Rick even checked around the woods with his flashlight. Nothing. Eventually he told Walter it was probably an animal. Branches scraping the cabin, maybe raccoons on the roof. Walter nodded like he understood, but he didn't look convinced. Not even close. Before Rick left, Walter grabbed his arm and asked something that gave him chills even years later when he told me this story. He said, "If somebody knocks tonight, don't let them in." Then he locked the cabin door. Rick laughed it off at the time. He wishes he hadn't, because around 4 a.m., the knocking started at the ranger station. Slow. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. Rick figured it had to be Walter again. Maybe panic attack. Maybe. So he opened the office door without even checking the window first, and standing outside in the dark was a little boy. Maybe 8 years old, barefoot, wearing soaking wet pajamas. And behind him, the trees moved. My uncle said the first thing he noticed about the boy was how pale he looked. Not regular pale. Either gray pale, like somebody who hadn't seen sunlight in years. His pajamas were soaked from the knees down, and pine needles clung to his sleeves and hair like he'd crawled through the forest to get there. But what really bothered Rick were the kid's eyes. They looked wrong. Not physically wrong, just empty. No panic, no confusion, no emotion at all. The boy stood there shivering slightly while staring past Rick into the ranger station. Then he asked, "Can I come inside?" Rick immediately thought about what Walter had said. "If somebody knocks tonight, don't let them in." At the time, that warning suddenly didn't feel paranoid anymore. Still, it was freezing outside and this was a child. So Rick crouched slightly and asked where his parents were. The boy answered instantly. "In the trees." Same exact phrase from the old story, word for word. Rick felt every hair on his arm stand up. He asked the boy his name. No. Answer asked where he came from. Nothing. The kid just kept staring into the office like he wanted something behind Rick instead of Rick himself. Then came the second knock. Not on the office door. On the side. Window 3 slow taps. Rick turned. So fast he nearly slipped. Nothing there, just darkness beyond the glass. Tall pine trees, swaying slightly in the wind. But when he looked back toward the doorway, the boy had moved closer. Much closer. Close enough that Rick could smell lake water and wet dirt coming off him again, the boy asked. "Can I come inside?" Rick finally did what every horror movie character refuses to do. He shut the damn door. Locked it too. The second the lock clicked, the knocking started again. This time, all around the building, tap, 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 window.wall.back. Door. Like multiple people circling the station at once, Rick grabbed the radio and called Leon, the maintenance guy who lived in a trailer near the front entrance. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Meanwhile, the tapping kept moving around the office in slow circles. Never loud, never frantic, almost patient. And every now and then, Rick heard the boy's voice outside, soft, barely above a whisper. "Please, let me in." Now, my uncle wasn't some teenager telling ghost stories around a campfire. He was a trained ranger, armed, level, dash-headed. But he admitted something to me. That night, while telling this story, he said he was terrified, because deep down, he knew there was no way an 8-year-old child could. We walked through those woods alone at 4 a.m. without freezing to death. Then the power went out completely. The office lights died instantly, leaving only moonlight through the windows. And the tapping stopped. Total silence. Rick said that somehow made everything worse, because at least the noise told him where they were. Now he had no idea. He grabbed his flashlight and revolver from the desk drawer and slowly backed toward the radio again. That's when he heard breathing. Inside the office, not behind him. Above him, he lifted the flashlight slowly toward the dark ceiling beams. Nothing there, but the breathing continued. Wet. Shallow. Like somebody struggling to inhale. Then came a creak from the storage hallway behind the office. Rick swung the flashlight toward, just in time to see movement. A small figure crossing the hallway. Bare feet, child-size. Gone in seconds. Rick shouted, "Hey!" No answer. He moved toward the hallway anyway because he genuinely thought some kid had somehow broken inside. The storage hall led to a back exit facing the woods behind the ranger station. And when Rick reached the end of it, back door stood wide open. Cold wind poured inside, carrying the smell of lake water and mud outside. His flashlight caught footprints, tiny barefoot footprints, dozens of them, not one. Child, dozens, all leading toward the trees. Rick said that's when survival instinct finally kicked in. He slammed the back door shut, locked it, and dragged a filing cabinet in front of it. Then he stayed awake until sunrise with the revolver in his lap. No, more knocking came after that. No voices either. Just silence. At dawn, Leon finally answered the radio. And the first thing Leon said was, "You saw him, didn't you?" Rick demanded Leon come immediately. When Leon arrived, Rick showed him the muddy footprints outside. Or at least he tried to. Because they were gone. Every single one. Like they'd never been there. But Walter's cabin, that was worse. Cabin 14 sat wide open when they arrived, the door hanging crooked, windows shattered, and Walter Briggs was gone. His duffel bag remained, untouched beside the bed. Wallet still there, truck still parked outside, but Walter himself had vanished. Just like the family years earlier. The sheriff's department searched Pine Hollow for 3 straight days, dogs tracked. Walter sent to the tree line behind cabin 14. Then lost it completely. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. And according to Rick, the sheriff quietly told him something off record before leaving. Walter Briggs wasn't using his real name. The fingerprints they ran matched somebody else entirely. A man named Daniel Mercer. And back in 1981, Daniel Mercer had been the lead detective investigating the disappearance of the family from cabin 14, the same detective who abruptly quit the force 6 months. Later, after suffering what records described as a severe psychological breakdown, he'd changed his name after that, disappeared for nearly 2 decades, then suddenly came back to Pine Hollow asking for cabin 14, specifically almost like he'd been looking for something, or someone. That night changed my uncle permanently. He stopped joking about the woods after dark, stopped taking solo patrols, and for the rest of the season, he refused to go anywhere near cabin 14 alone. But according to him, the worst part still hadn't happened yet. about 2 weeks after Walter Briggs disappeared, Pine Hollow shut down early for the season. Officially, management blamed low bookings and weather concerns. Unofficially, nobody wanted to stay there anymore. Word about Walter spread fast despite the sheriff trying to keep things quiet. Hunters talked, locals talked, and eventually people started refusing cabins anywhere near the lake. My Uncle Rick stayed only because he needed the paycheck, but he told me those final weeks felt wrong. Not scary all the time. Worse than scary. Anticipatory. Like the woods themselves were waiting for something. Every night after sunset, campground became dead silent. No crickets, no frogs, no wind, just this heavy stillness that pressed against your ears. And then came the voices, not loud, never loud. Rick would hear them during patrols. Near the lake, whispers drifting through the trees, sometimes sounding like a child crying, other times sounding like adults talking too quietly to understand. Whenever he tried following the sounds, they'd stop immediately. Leon warned him never to follow voices into the woods after dark, especially near Cabin 14. Rick finally snapped one night and demanded Leon tell him the truth. Real truth, no more campground rumors, no more half stories, and after enough whiskey, Leon finally did. According to Leon, the little boy from the original disappearance wasn't completely truthful when police questioned him back in 1981 because eventually the kid admitted something else. Something investigators kept secret from the public. The boy claimed his parents hadn't simply walked into the woods. He said somebody called them there. At first, his mother heard it. A woman's voice outside the cabin late at night crying, begging for help. His father went outside looking for her, then never came back. An hour later, the mother heard her husband's voice calling from the trees instead. So she went looking too, and she disappeared the same way. The boy told police he stayed, sighed until morning because he remembered one thing his father yelled before vanishing. Don't follow the voices. Now here's where Leon's story got ugly, because apparently search teams found something deep in the woods during that investigation. A clearing, hidden maybe 2 miles behind cabin 14. And in that clearing stood dozens of crude wooden crosses nailed to trees. Not graves. Markers, each one carved with names. Some old, some recent. One of them had the missing family's last name scratched into it before they were even officially declared dead. Police destroyed the clearing afterward, or at least they tried to. But every few years, hunters or hikers reported finding crosses again, always deeper in the forest, always near the lake. Rick asked Leon why nobody simply shut Pine Hollow down permanently. Leon answered with something that honestly freaked me out more than the ghost story itself. Because the disappearances stopped whenever people stayed there. Think about that for a second. As long as Pine Hollow stayed active, whatever was out there seemed contained. That realization sat in Rick's head like poison because now, Walter Briggs disappearing didn't feel random anymore. It felt connected. Like the campground had somehow pulled him back. A few nights later, Rick worked his final solo patrol before winter closure, and against his better judgment, he drove toward Cabin 14 one last time. He told himself he just wanted closure, but deep down, I think he wanted proof. None of it was real. The cabin looked exactly the same as always. Dark, rotting, still. Rick stepped out with his flashlight and checked the porch. Nothing unusual. Then he noticed the front door standing, slightly open. Now, Rick swore he personally locked that cabin earlier that afternoon. But there it was, open maybe 3 inches. He should have left immediately instead, pushed the door wider. Inside smelled like wet wood and mildew. The beam from his flashlight swept across the old furniture. Then froze. Somebody sat in the corner. At first Rick thought it was Walter Briggs. Thin frame, gray, jacket, head lowered. But when the figure slowly lifted its face into the flashlight beam, it was the little boy. Same soaked pajamas, same pale skin, same empty eyes, and somehow exactly the same age. No older than 8. The boy stared directly at Rick and whispered, "They're coming back." Then the cabin walls started knocking. Not one knock, hundreds all around him, ceiling, floor, windows, like dozens of hands pounding from outside. Rick backed toward the door, while the boy kept staring. Then came voices from the woods, multiple voices, calling his name, not screaming, inviting. Friendly, that's the detail. Rick always repeated when telling this part. The voices sounded friendly, like people trying to help him. And somewhere among them, he heard Walter Briggs. Clear as day, Rick. Over here. Then another voice, a woman crying. Then a man yelling for help. The forest around. Cabin 14 suddenly sounded full of people. Rick ran. Didn't investigate. Didn't look back. Ran straight to the truck while the knocking behind him became deafening. He jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. But before pulling away, he glanced once toward the tree line and saw them. Figures standing between the pines, dozens of them. Men, women, children, perfectly. Still watching him, some looked pale and waterlogged. Others looked almost normal. But one face stood closest to the road, Walter Briggs, except his mouth moved wrong, stretching too wide while he smiled, and even through the truck windows, Rick heard him whisper, "You should have stayed." Rick floored the truck so hard he nearly crashed through the campground gate. He quit Pine Hollow the next morning, didn't even finish the season. And here's the part that still bothers me. Pine Hollow finally shut down permanently in 2006 after another disappearance. Family hiking near the old lake vanished overnight. Search teams found their campsite untouched. Food still warm over the fire. Shoes still outside the tent, but no family. Just footprints leading toward the trees. Small barefoot footprints, going both directions. For years after leaving Pine Hollow, my uncle refused to talk about the place. Completely refused. If somebody brought it up during family gatherings, he'd either leave the room or suddenly find an excuse to step outside for a cigarette. And that was saying something, because Rick quit smoking back in 2003, but every October, without fail, he'd get weird for a few days. Quiet, distracted, checking. Locks before bed, closing curtains before sunset. I didn't understand why until Thanksgiving of 2014. That was the night he finally told me the rest. Apparently, about 6 months after Pine Hollow officially shut down, Rick got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was an old cassette. Tape, nothing else. No letter, no explanation, just masking tape stuck across the cassette with 3 words written in black marker. Cabin 14A. Hooter. Rick nearly threw it away immediately, but curiosity got him. So he dug out an old tape player from storage and listened to it alone in his garage around midnight. He said the recording started, with static for almost a full minute. Then came a man's voice, Walter Briggs, or Daniel Mercer, whatever his real name actually was. Rick recognized it. Instantly, the recording sounded shaky, breathless, terrified, like somebody trying very hard not to panic. The tape began mid-sentence. "If anybody finds this, do not come looking for me," and silence for several seconds. After that, Walter started explaining why he'd returned to Pine Hollow. And according to him, the original investigation back in 1981 never sat right with him, not because the family vanished, but because of what search teams found in the woods. Afterward, Walter claimed he personally discovered the clearing Leon described. Only, there was more to it than wooden crosses at the center. Of the clearing stood an old stone well. Not natural, man-made, ancient-looking, and around the rim. Carved over and over again into the rock were the same words, "Let them eye in aside a search." Crews apparently tried filling the well with dirt after the investigation. Didn't work. Every morning, the dirt would be gone. Walter said, one deputy swore he heard voices coming from inside it at night, children crying, people begging for help. The sheriff eventually sealed the entire area off and ordered everybody involved never to discuss it again. But Walter became obsessed. He spent years researching the land around Pine Hollow and eventually uncovered something horrifying. Before The campground existed. That land belonged to a religious settlement back in the 1800s. Tiny little off-grid community. Maybe 30 people total. And according to surviving newspaper archives, the entire settlement disappeared during the winter of 1871. Every resident vanished. The only thing left behind was an abandoned church near the lake. Inside the church, investigators reportedly found dozens of phrases scratched into the walls, mostly religious rambling, except for one sentence repeated everywhere: they imitate the lost. Walter became convinced something lived beneath the forest around Pine Hollow. Something old. Something that could mimic voices, maybe even people. And according to the tape, he believed the thing needed permission somehow. An invitation. That's why the voices always begged, why they asked campers for help. Why the little boy at the ranger station asked to come inside. Rick almost stopped. The tape right there. But then Walter said something that froze his blood. You think it's haunting the woods. It isn't, it's hunting. Then the recording changed. At first, Rick thought the tape was damaged. Static burst across the audio while Walter started whispering urgently. He kept repeating, "They found me." Then came knocking sounds in the background. .3, knocks. Pause. .3. More exactly like the ranger station. Walter started breathing harder. You could hear furniture moving, a door locking. Then came a child's voice on the tape. Soft, tiny. "Can I come inside?" Rick told me hearing that voice again after 16 years nearly made him physically sick. Walter answered immediately, "No." Ow. Child kept speaking. Only now the voice sounded wrong. Somehow, like multiple voices, layered together slightly out of sync. "Please," knocking. Again, louder this time. Walter started crying on the recording, actually crying. Then suddenly, the child laughed. Not normal laughter, more like several people laughing together from very far away, and then came the part my uncle still refuses to describe in detail, because according to him, something else started talking on the tape, not outside the cabin, inside it, right beside. Walter Rick only listened to that portion. Once he never replayed it again, but he told me whatever spoke did not sound human, not distorted, not demonic movie. Nonsense, just wrong, like hearing words spoken by something that learned language without understanding people. The tape ended with Walter screaming, then silence, long silence, until finally, right before the cassette stopped completely, Rick heard footsteps crunching through pine needles, and Walter's voice whispered one final sentence. They were never the missing people. Click. End of tape. Naturally, I asked Rick where the cassette is now. He stared at me for maybe 10 straight seconds before answering. I burned it, honestly. I believed him until last year, because after my uncle died, he cleaned out his garage and hidden inside an old toolbox beneath fishing gear and rusted screws. We found a cassette tape wrapped in masking tape. 3 words written in faded black marker, cabin 14 audio. I haven't listened to it, and after hearing my uncle's story, I don't think I ever will. Back in 2007, my older cousin worked the night shift at a roadside motel outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Now, when I say motel, don't picture one of those modern chain places with key cards and security cameras everywhere. I'm talking about the kind of motel people only stop at because they're too tired to keep driving. Flickering neon sign, ice machine that barely worked, thin walls, parking, lot lights buzzing with moths all night. That kind of place. It was called the Red Mesa Inn, and it sat off a lonely stretch of highway about 20 minutes outside town. Truckers stayed there mostly. Occasionally tourists. Sometimes people who didn't want their names remembered. My cousin, he took the job because he dropped out of community college and needed money fast. The owner paid cash under the table and didn't ask questions. Honestly, that should have been a red flag from the start, but Nate liked the work at first. Most nights were quiet. Check a few guests in. Refill the vending machines. Watch. Terrible. Late night TV behind the front desk until sunrise. Easy money. The only weird thing about the place was room 27. Nobody rented room 27. Ever at first. Nate assumed it was under renovation or had plumbing problems or something. But the room looked perfectly normal from outside. Curtains drawn, door painted fresh. Nothing unusual. Still, whenever guests asked for a room near the back of the property, the manager always skipped over 27 automatically, never 27. One night, Nate finally asked why. The manager, it's an older guy named Sal, answered way too quickly. Electrical issues, and immediately changed the subject. Now, Nate wasn't stupid. And when people avoid answering simple questions, curiosity tends to take over. So a few shifts later, around maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, he used the master key and checked room 27 himself. He told me the room looked untouched, not abandoned, untouched, like somebody cleaned it daily despite. Nobody staying there, bed perfectly made, no dust anywhere, bathroom spotless, TV unplugged, and on the nightstand sat an old leather purse. That was the first thing that bothered him, because motels don't leave guest belongings sitting around for years. Nate opened the purse, expecting housekeeping junk or lost property paperwork. Instead, he found a wallet. Inside was an Arizona driver's license belonging to a woman named Evelyn Voss, age 30-2. The license photo showed a brunette woman with tired-looking eyes and a nervous little smile, and the expiration date, it's almost 10 years earlier. That alone creeped Nate out enough to leave. But before shutting the door, he noticed something else. The closet. Its sliding door stood open maybe 2 inches, just barely enough to notice, and Nate swore it hadn't been open when he entered the room. Now logically, air pressure, uneven floor, old building, except Nate said the inside of that closet was completely dark despite the room light being on. Like the light somehow stopped at the doorway. He shut the closet fully before leaving, then locked room 27 again. Next morning, he casually asked Sal who Evelyn Voss was. According to Nate, the color drained right out of Sal's face, not subtle either. Like immediate panic, Sal asked where he heard that name. Nate admitted he found the purse. Huge mistake Sal got. Furious. Not angry manager. Furious, scared. Furious, he grabbed Nate by the arm hard enough to leave bruises and told him never to enter room 27 again. Then he said something Nate never forgot. If that room looks occupied, don't disturb her. Art nodded her after that. Nate became obsessed. He started searching old newspapers online during slow shifts. And after a while, he found Evelyn Voss. Back in September of 1998, Evelyn disappeared while driving alone through northern Arizona, according to reports. Her car broke down somewhere near Flagstaff during a thunderstorm. She called roadside assistance from a payphone around 11:40 p.m., then vanished. No. Body ever found? No. Confirmed sightings afterward. The article included one detail that made Nate's stomach drop. Evelyn's last known location before disappearing. The Red Mesa, and now naturally, Nate wanted to quit right then. But life's complicated when you're broke in your early 20s. So instead, he kept working while trying very hard not to think about room 27 for about 3 weeks. Things stayed normal. Then came the knocking. It started around 3:15 every morning. 3 knocks, slow, heavy dot. Always from room 27. The first night, Nate ignored it. Second night, 2. By the third night, curiosity got him again. So he walked down the motel walkway carrying a flashlight and stopped outside. Room 27, silence. No TV noise. No movement, nothing. Then dash knock. From inside the room, Nate froze. Another knock followed, immediately not on the door. On the wall beside his head. Like somebody inside knew exactly where he stood. Nate backed away, fast, and returned to the office. The knocking stopped the second he left. Next morning, he confronted Sal again. This time, Sal didn't get angry. He just looked exhausted. Like a man tired of carrying something too heavy for too long. Finally, Sal admitted Evelyn really had stayed there the night she disappeared. Room 27 specifically. And according to Sal, she never actually checked out. Then he told Nate the part that made him stop sleeping properly for weeks. Every employee who'd stayed alone in room 27 overnight eventually quit. Except one, because one employee was found dead inside the closet back in 2001. Officially, heart attack. Unofficially, his face supposedly looked so terrified the paramedics refused to describe it afterward. After hearing that, Nate decided he was done messing around. No more curiosity. No more room to 7. And honestly, that probably would have been the end of it. If he hadn't seen Evelyn standing outside the ice machine 3 nights. Later at exactly 3:15 a.m., Nate said at first he thought the woman outside. The ice machine was just another guest. The parking lot lights at the Red Mesa Inn were terrible. And from the office window, all he could really make out was long dark hair and somebody standing perfectly still beside the ice machine near the back row of rooms. But something felt off immediately, mostly because she wasn't moving at all. No. Shifting weight, no looking around, just standing there facing the machine while her hair moved, slightly in the desert wind. Nate checked the clock on the office wall. 3:15 a.m. exactly. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. So he stepped outside with the flashlight and called out, "Ma'am?" No response. The woman remained completely still. Now the Red Mesa sat right beside miles of empty highway and desert. So Nate's first thought was maybe somebody stranded needed help. But as he walked closer, he noticed something strange about the parking lot itself. No sound. Normally at night you'd hear trucks down the highway, into crickets, something. But the entire motel had gone dead silent. Even the buzzing neon sign near the road had stopped humming. Then the woman slowly turned around, and Nate nearly dropped the flashlight, because it was Evelyn, or at least the woman from the driver's license photo. Same dark hair, same nervous eyes, same face. Only, now she looked pale enough to glow beneath the parking lot lights. And her clothes. They looked soaking wet, not rain wet either, heavy wet, like somebody had pulled her from deep water. Nate couldn't move, couldn't even speak. Meanwhile, Evelyn stared directly at him with this awful, exhausted expression, like she hadn't slept in years. Then she asked quietly, "Did he let you into my room?" Nate told me hearing her voice scared him worse than if she'd screamed, because she sounded normal, totally normal, not ghostly, not distorted, just tired. He tried asking if she needed help. But before he could finish speaking, Evelyn suddenly looked past him toward the motel office, and her face changed instantly. Pure panic. Then she whispered, "He knows you saw me," and ran. Not toward the highway, toward room 27. Nate chased after her. Automatically stupid decision. The second he rounded the corner near the room, he saw Evelyn standing outside room 27's door, except now she wasn't alone. Somebody stood inside the room watching through the gap in the curtains. Tall figure, male, completely motionless. Nate couldn't make out a face. Just the outline of a man standing in darkness. Then Evelyn started pounding on the door, not trying to get in, trying to get out. That's what Nate realized later. She was trapped inside somehow. Every time she hit the door, the lights around room 27 flickered violently, and from inside the room came knocking. 3 slow knocks, exactly like before, only much louder. Nate shouted for Sal, no answer. Then the motel office lights suddenly shut off behind him. Complete darkness swallowed the entire property except for the weak yellow glow outside room 27, and the man inside the curtain moved slowly. The curtain pulled back just enough for Nate to finally see his face. My cousin described it to me once, and never again, because apparently the face looked wrong in a way, couldn't properly explain, like features pressed into soft clay eyes, to low smile, to wide. Not a person pretending to be human, something practicing. The figure tilted its head toward Nate, while Evelyn kept slamming both hands against the motel door, screaming, "Don't let him open it." Then the door to room 27 slowly began unlocking by itself. Nate ran, didn't think, didn't stop. just sprinted straight back toward the office while the motel lights flickered behind him, and the whole time he heard footsteps chasing him across the parking lot. Not Evelyn's footsteps. Heavy ones. Slow ones. Like whoever walked behind him knew they didn't need to hurry. Nate locked himself inside the office and immediately called Sal. Straight to voicemail. Then he called the sheriff's department, but the line wouldn't connect. Not static. Not dead. Just endless silence. That's when somebody knocked on the office window. 3 slow knocks. Nate turned toward the glass, expecting Evelyn instead. Sal stood outside. Only something about him looked wrong too. His motel uniform hung soaking wet against his skin, and his expression looked blank. Completely blank. Sal smiled slightly, pointed toward room G7, then mouthed 4 words through the glass. "She wants you inside." Nate refused to open the door. Best decision of his life. Because the second he shook his head, Sal's smile disappeared. And his face changed, not dramatically, subtly, like the skin stopped. Fitting correctly, his mouth stretched wider, eyes widening without blinking. Then the thing outside wearing Sal's face started scratching slowly against the office window. Not banging. Scratching. Like fingernails testing the glass. Meanwhile, from somewhere deeper in the motel, came Evelyn screaming. Not screaming in fear. Screaming like somebody being dragged away. And suddenly all the lights came back on, instantly normal again. Parking lot buzzing. Highway. Noise returning. Everything. The thing outside the office vanished completely. No Evelyn. Nothing. Just empty. Parking spaces and desert wind. Nate waited until sunrise before leaving the office, and when the real Sal finally arrived around 8 o'clock a.m., looking confused and half asleep, Nate realized something horrifying. Sal had clearly just woken up, meaning whatever stood outside the office last night was never him. The moment Nate realized the real Sal had just arrived for work, he completely lost it. Started yelling, demanding answers, threatening to quit. Sal tried calming him down at first. But the second Nate mentioned seeing Sal outside the office window during the night, the old man went dead quiet. Then he locked the office door, pulled the blinds shut, and finally told Nate the truth, or at least as much truth as he knew, back in 1998. Before Sal owned the Red Mesa, and the motel belonged to another man named Curtis Vale. According to Sal, Curtis was respected around town. Church-going guy, friendly, always smiling. The kind of man people trusted, immediately, especially women traveling alone. And apparently Evelyn, boss, checked into the motel during a thunderstorm after her car broke down on the highway. Room 27, same room. She was supposed to stay one night. Instead, police questioned Curtis extensively back then, but they never found enough evidence to charge him with anything. No body, no witnesses, nothing, no witnesses, nothing. Eventually, the investigation died, but rumors didn't. Because after Evelyn disappeared, strange things started happening around room 27. Almost immediately, guests reported hearing crying from inside empty rooms. Housekeepers refused to clean 27 after multiple employees claimed they saw somebody standing inside the bathroom mirror behind them. One maid quit on the spot after finding muddy footprints leading from the bathtub to the closet. Bare. Footprints like someone had climbed out dripping wet. And according to Sal, Curtis himself became terrified of the room. He boarded it up personally. Around 2001, after the employee died inside the closet, then 6 months later, Curtis disappeared too, vanished without a trace, exactly like Evelyn. At this point, Nate asked the obvious question, why the hell keep the motel open? Sal answered with something that made my skin crawl the first time I heard it. Because whatever's in that room doesn't stay there anymore, apparently after Curtis disappeared. The activity spread. Different rooms, parking lot sightings, guests, hearing voices outside their doors. Late at night asking for help, always sounding familiar. A spouse, a child, a friend. And every single incident started the same. Way 3 knocks, Sal admitted. He'd tried selling the motel twice. Both buyers backed out after spending one night there. One of them apparently drove away, before sunrise without even collecting his luggage. Then Sal said something Nate never forgot. Room 27 isn't haunted. Nate asked what the difference was. Sal stared toward the back section of the motel for a long time before answering. Hauntings repeat themselves. This thing learns. Night Nate packed everything he owned into his truck, intending to leave before sunset. No notice, no final shift, nothing. But around 5 p.m., while loading boxes near his room, he noticed something strange. The curtain inside room 27 had moved. Not fluttered, moved like somebody standing inside had pulled it aside slightly. Nate tried ignoring it. Then he saw Evelyn, standing behind the glass. This time, she looked different. Worse. Dark bruising ringed her throat. Her wet hair hung across half her face, and she looked terrified. She raised one shaking hand slowly toward the window, then pointed downward. Toward the closet inside room 27 Nate should have left immediately. Instead, curiosity destroyed him again. He grabbed the master key and walked straight toward the room. He told himself maybe he'd finally understand what was happening. Maybe he could help her somehow. Deep down, I think he just needed proof he wasn't losing his mind. The room felt colder the second he stepped inside. Not air conditioner cold, basement cold. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones instantly and unlike before. The closet door now stood wide open. Inside looked completely normal. Extra blankets, cleaning supplies, nothing unusual then. Nate noticed scratches along the closet floor, deep ones, like something heavy had been dragged repeatedly across the wood. He crouched lower with the flashlight and finally saw it. A narrow metal ring bolted into the floorboards beneath the blankets, attached to a trap door. The second he pulled it open, smell hit him. Rot. Water. Mold. Something much worse underneath all three. Beneath, room 27 sat a narrow concrete chamber, maybe 6 feet deep. And at the bottom was a chair. Old rusted restraints hung from its arms, chains bolted into the wall, and carved over every inch of concrete were names. Dozens of names. Some old, some recent. But one carving looked fresher than the others. Walt Yarnate swore he never told Sal about the man he'd seen standing inside room 27, meaning somebody else had been down there recently. Then his flashlight caught something else beside the chair. A woman's driver's license, Evelyn Voss. Only, the photo had been scratched straight through the eyes. That's when the trapdoor slammed shut above him. Pitch blackness swallowed the chamber instantly, and from directly behind Nate, a man whispered, "She opened the door for me." Nate said. The voice behind him sounded wet. That's the only word he could ever find for it. Wet, like somebody speaking through a mouthful of water. The second he heard it, he spun around so fast, he smashed his shoulder against the concrete wall. His flashlight beam shook violently across the underground chamber and landed on a man standing in the far corner, tall, thin, completely bald. His motel uniform hung rotting off his body in strips. At first, Nate thought it was Curtis's veil, the original motel owner. Then the thing stepped forward into the light, and Nate realized parts of its face were moving independently, not twitching. Sliding like loose skin trying to settle into place. One eye drifted slightly lower than the other, while its smile stretched too wide across its cheeks, and despite standing perfectly still, water dripped steadily from the bottom of its pant legs. Plink, plink, plink. The thing tilted its head, then spoke again. "She let me inside." Nate backed against the wall so hard he nearly fell. Above him, started pounding on the trapdoor, screaming for Sal. No answer. The thing in the corner watched calmly the entire time, not rushing him, not threatening. Him just watching. Then it smiled wider, and another voice suddenly answered from the darkness, sighed Nate. Evelyn's voice. "You shouldn't yell down here." Nate whipped the flashlight sideways, but nobody stood there. Meanwhile, the thing near the wall began, slowly walking closer, one dragging step at a time. Its joints bent wrong, like somebody imitating human movement after only seeing it once. Nate grabbed the rusted chair and shoved it toward the creature before scrambling up the concrete wall, toward the trapdoor. And that's when he noticed something horrifying. The inside of the trapdoor wasn't locked. It had no lock at all, meaning somebody above wasn't holding it shut. Something below had. It's pulled it closed, then came knocking. 3 slow knocks, directly beneath the floor. Not above, below, from under the concrete itself. Nate started screaming again, and all around him, voices answered from the darkness beyond the flashlight beam. Different voices, men, women, children, some crying, some laughing softly, some whispering his name. Then one voice spoke clearly from somewhere very close. "Help us." The flashlight suddenly died. Complete darkness swallowed everything. Nate said he'd never experienced fear like that before or since, because once the light disappeared, could hear movement all around him. Bare feet against wet concrete, breathing, whispering, dozens of people, shifting in darkness inches away. Then fingers touched the back of his neck. Ice cold. Nate completely lost control after that. He started clawing blindly upward until somehow his hand caught the edge of the trapdoor. This time it opened instantly. Sunlight poured down from above, and Nate practically launched himself out of the chamber onto the motel floor. He spun around expecting something to follow him, but the trapdoor below sat completely dark and silent. No voices, no movement, nothing. Then he noticed Sal standing in the doorway of room 27 watching him. Only Sal looked terrified. Not guilty. Terrified. Nate started yelling about the chamber beneath the room, about the thing downstairs, about Evelyn. But Sal interrupted him immediately. What did it look like? Nate described the man-shaped thing as best he could. The rotting uniform, the shifting face, the water dripping from its clothes. And the second he mentioned water, Sal whispered, "Oh, God." Then Sal finally confessed the part he'd hidden for years. Curtis Vale never disappeared. Police found his body, just not officially. According to Sal, Curtis had been discovered inside the underground chamber after the employee died in 2001. Only the body didn't make sense, because Curtis had apparently been dead for weeks. Yet witnesses swore they'd seen him walking around the motel days earlier, talking, working, smiling. Normally Sal himself claimed he'd spoken to Curtis. Less than 24 hours before police found the corpse, Nate asked the obvious question. Then who the hell was walking around pretending to be Curtis? Sal didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the trapdoor and said quietly, "It wears people." Then came the sound. 3 knocks. From underneath the floor again, both men froze. Another 3 knocks followed. Then Evelyn screamed. Not distant this time, right beneath them. The sound hit so suddenly and violently. Nate actually staggered backward, and from below the floorboards, dozens of voices began whispering together all at once. Not random whispers either. They repeated the same sentence over and over. "Let us out." The floor beneath room 27 started shaking lightly, dust falling from the ceiling, the trapdoor rattling. In its frame, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Sal completely panicked. He grabbed Nate by the arm and yelled, "We have to leave right now," because according to Sal, the thing beneath room 27 only knocked when it wanted inside somewhere else. The second Sal said that thing wanted inside somewhere else, the motel power died. Not flickered, died. Every light across the property shut off simultaneously, plunging the red mesa and into total darkness, except for the weak orange sunset leaking through the windows and beneath their feet. Not knocking anymore. Something slammed against the underside of the trapdoor hard enough to shake the entire room. Nate and Sal both stumbled backward. Another impact hit immediately after bang. Dust burst from the floorboards. The rusted metal ring on the trapdoor jerked violently upward, like somebody below was pulling it with enormous strength. Then came Evelyn's voice again. Crying, begging, double quotes. "Please, don't leave me down here." Nate admitted something to me years later that still bothers him for a second. He almost opened the trapdoor again, because the voice sounded so real. So, terrified. But Sal grabbed him before he could move and practically dragged him outside room 27. The motel hallway had gone completely silent again. No highway noise, No wind, nothing. Then doors started, opening, one by one. Room 12, creek room 18, creek room 22. Every empty motel room slowly opening by itself, and inside each doorway stood someone. Motionless figures. Men, women, children. Some looked pale and soaked like Evelyn. Others looked almost normal except for the smiles. Every single one smiling too wide. Watching them, Nate whispered, "What are they?" Sal answered without taking his eyes off the hallway. "They're the ones who let it in." Then the figures started stepping into the walkway together, not running, just slow, synchronized movement toward them. Nate and Sal bolted for the office. Behind them came footsteps. Dozens of footsteps, perfectly matched. The office sat near the center of the property, and the second they got inside, Sal locked the door and shoved the filing cabinet against it. Then he pulled a revolver from beneath. The desk, Nate asked if they should call police. Sal just laughed nervously. "No one's coming out here fast enough." Outside the office window, motel guests kept appearing. Only there weren't actually any guests staying there, that weak truckers, families, children holding stuffed animals, all standing silently in the parking lot facing the office. And every face looked slightly wrong, like imperfect copies. Then Nate spotted Evelyn among them. She stood nearest, the ice machine staring directly at him. And unlike the others, she looked scared. Not smiling, scared. She mouthed something through the office window. 2 words. "Behind you." Nate turned, too late. Something stood inside the office, tall figure near the back. Hallway, impossible. The doors never opened, but there it was. The same thing Nate saw beneath room 27, only now it wore Curtis Vale's face perfectly. Too perfectly, like a restored photograph. The thing smiled warmly and said, "You shouldn't lock people out." Sal fired instantly. The revolver blast nearly deafened Nate. Inside the tiny office, the bullet hit the thing directly in the chest and did absolutely nothing. No blood, no reaction. The smile never even twitched. Then the office lights flickered. Briefly back on, and Nate saw the walls. Names scratched everywhere. Hundreds of names carved into the wallpaper beneath layers of old paint. People missing from Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico. Dates stretching back decades. The thing noticed Nate staring, then calmly said, "They stay with me." Sal fired again. This time the thing moved fast. It's too fast. 1 second it stood across the room, the next it grabbed Sal by the throat. Nate said the sound Sal made didn't even sound human. The thing lifted him completely off the floor, while smiling gently like a parent comforting a child. Then it whispered something into Sal's ear, whatever it said. Instantly changed Sal's expression from panic to recognition, like he suddenly understood something horrible. Then Sal started crying, actually crying, and whispered, "She's still down there." The thing smiled wider. Sal stopped fighting immediately after that. That's the part Nate could never explain. Sal willingly went with it. The creature dragged him calmly toward the back hallway, while Sal stared blankly ahead like he was sleepwalking. Nate tried grabbing him, but dozens of hands suddenly slammed against the office windows outside. Bang, 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 . All the smiling figures outside pounding the glass together, and mixed among them were voices, screaming, "Let us in." Nate panicked and ran through the side office exit into the parking lot. Huge mistake, because the entire motel property was full now. Figures everywhere. Standing. Between cars. Watching from walkways. Peeking around corners. Some wearing clothes from completely different decades. 1940s, 1970s. Modern hoodies, truck stop uniforms. And every single one smiling too. Wide. Nate sprinted toward his truck while hearing footsteps closing in from every direction. Then Evelyn appeared beside him suddenly, not smiling, terrified. She grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt and whispered, "If you leave now, don't ever come back." Then she shoved something into his hand, a motel room key, room 27. And before Nate could speak, she was gone, vanished completely. Nate jumped into his truck and floored it straight through the motel exit in the rearview mirror. He saw every figure on the property standing perfectly still watching him leave, including Sal. Only Sal's smile now stretched far wider than a human mouth possibly could. Nate never returned to Red Mesa again. The motel shut down permanently 3 months later after a fire destroyed most of the property officially. Electrical problems caused it, but here's the part that still bothers me. Last summer, while driving through Arizona, I looked up the old Red Mesa and online out of curiosity. Most of the motel's gone now, burned ruins mostly, except for one surviving section, still standing at the back of the property. And according to Urban Explorers Online, Room 27's door is still locked every night, even though nobody owns the place anymore. And every now and then, travelers on the highway report seeing a woman standing beside the old ice machine after 3 a.m., soaking wet, waiting for someone to let her inside.